Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knifemaker's Friday 5. Today, grinding false edges. So a couple things before I get to my main topic today, which is taking a little deep dive into the grinding of false edges. First, a couple channel news points. If you haven't watched my series called Jake's Toolbox, I think it's kind of a fun departure from my usual type of video. My son Jake turned 21 this year, and I made a box of tools for him. So in that series, I'm going to show how I make a whole bunch of just kind of standard tools for the shop. Screwdrivers, a hammer, chisels, a whole bunch of different stuff. And at some point, I'll do a video where I talk a little bit about why you might bother to make a box full of stuff that requires this huge time commitment when you could just go down to Walmart and buy the whole thing for a couple $100. There are plenty of other reasons, but just from a craft standpoint, if you're interested in making knives, there's a lot of crosstalk between the kind of skills that you use to make knives and just all kinds of other cool things that you can make. And so this is really just kind of a fun exploration of where that might take you. Anyway, I'll link to that playlist in case you're interested in watching some of those videos. So also, if you've been thinking about dipping your toe into the water of knife making, I just did a review of a fantastic book for new knife makers, folks that are just getting started in knife making. It's by Tim McCrate. It's called Knives You Can Make. Fantastic book, like I said, and I'll link to that video in the cards and description. All right, so let me turn to the main topic here for this video. I had a Patreon subscriber, a guy named Tucker Benjamin, write to me asking for me to address kind of some challenges that he was having in grinding false edges on his knives. Now, of course, I got to put a plug in here for Patreon. I appreciate everybody who helps support this channel. Guys like Tucker who, show the love on patreon.com/Walter Sorrells. Folks who help me out, I try to help them out. Anyway, false edges. So false edges, in case you're new to knife making, are sort of the sharp looking bit on top of some knives that's actually not sharp. So I find that one of the main keys to making progress as a knife maker is to clearly understand the nature of the problem that you're facing. And once you actually understand kind of logically, once you've got it in your head, it's a whole lot easier to figure out the steps that are necessary to solve that problem. So let's take a look at this imaginary knife. We've got a clip point here like you'd see on a K-bar or a Bowie. Here's the knife without a false edge. And here it is with the edge ground in there. So the first thing to understand is that this is exactly like grinding a bevel. If you can grind a bevel, you can grind a false edge. As you can see here, the false edge is a perfectly flat surface. Nothing tricky whatsoever. It's just like a cutting edge bevel. Second point, it's ground to a consistent thickness on the edge, just like you'd grind a normal cutting edge, except generally a little bit thicker. Here and here along these two lines, exactly the same width. What that means is that as soon as you go past this point, the grind widens out into a sort of inverted V shape, eventually dwindling to little points. Still, just one long flat plane. Another point, this angle is much steeper than a bevel grind. How much? Well, there's no specific angle. It depends on the thickness of your blade and what the geometry is, but maybe 25-30 degrees, give or take. It'll really depend on the dimensions of the knife. Thinner blade, steeper angle. Okay, so how do you get there? Let's head over to the grinder. Instead of demonstrating on a real knife, I'll demonstrate on this wooden blank since it'll be a little larger, and that'll hopefully make it easier to see what I'm doing. Now, the first thing that I always want to do is describe two lines where we want our false edge to be. This is even before I grind my edge bevels. The reason for this is that scribing them after the bevels have been ground is nearly impossible. You need a nice flat to reference off of. I'll put them about 50 thou apart, but they could be any width you want. Now, after I've ground my bevels, and of course it goes without saying that they're perfect and symmetrical, I've got a taper to the tip. And so we'll just grind away on that false edge. As you can see, this point here is where you'll be removing the most meat. So we want to focus here when we begin and not do too much with the tip. Then we'll kind of expand in both directions as the bevel deepens. One of the specific points Tucker wanted me to address was how to avoid grinding away the tip of the knife. Basically, the answer is, first, I'm staying away from that area until the very end, and second, as long as I keep the orientation of the knife correct, that part won't be in contact with the platen until the very, very end of your grinding. The idea here is that if you're looking down from above, your scribed line will be exactly parallel to the platen. Now, like I said, that means that in practice, you're only grinding this point at first. Concentrate on keeping the knife at a really consistent angle. As soon as I get close to where I want to be, I'll flip the knife over and repeat exactly the same thing on the other side. Just like everything else on the knife, you want everything symmetrical from side to side, so leave yourself room to screw up. As soon as you feel vaguely close to the right place, move up to a higher grit belt. I'll usually jump from 40 way on up to something like 220, just using it to get rid of all the scratches from the previous grind. It's possible to end up with a bunch of different facets and messy looking stuff. Try to fix that in your first grind by finding a consistent angle and gently working it back and forth. If you're having problems, go up to a higher grit and you can solve it at a slower speed. Now I'm not going to show it here because we're just using a piece of wood, but normally I'll finish up with a structured abrasive. I often use a combat abrasive 45 micron belt. If you want to help out the channel and save a few bucks in the process, by the way, I've got a link in the description to my guys at Combat. But another good option is the 3M Trizac belt, which comes in a lot of grit sizes. Whatever the case, these structured abrasives are slow cutting, leaving a nice even surface finish, and they have zero belt bump. So they're great for sneaking up on your final grind, and they're a lot easier to control than conventional aluminum oxide belts up in those high grit numbers. After that, it's just a matter of making sure you're nice and flat to the existing bevel, and then even them up side to side. As long as you can stay true to your reference line and scrub back and forth holding a steady angle, you'll get a clean, flat bevel and you won't grind the tip off your blade. So I don't want to give you the impression that every single false edge is exactly like this. Every false edge is not a clip point. Some taper a little bit, instead of using those completely parallel reference lines on the top, they'll taper. Sometimes you'll see production knives where the false edge is sort of hollow ground, so it's obviously using a very large diameter wheel. There are a lot of different variations, but this will give you a good starting place. Incidentally, every false edge is not a clip point. You'll also see swedges on drop points, and those are basically ground with a plunge line, so they look just like a normally ground bevel. They're just not sharp. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.